Welcome to our introduction to graphing module in our behavioral technician training. I'm going to go over a number of different bits of information today, and this initial phase is just going to be kind of an overview, and then we're going to get into a little bit of a tutorial about actually how to do this and how you're going to be able to get into Microsoft Excel and be able to use that to be able to produce graphs that you can utilize in your role as a technician. So first off, I'm going to give you some information. If others are interested, we can include references to this. I've got some really a great introduction on group designs from a chapter that Don Baer from Bear, Wolf, and Risley. He was one of the originators of behavior analysis. He taught at University of Kansas in the 50s and 60s, I believe. But he actually wrote a great book chapter that I have used whenever I teach students in behavior analysis, and it kind of talks about this whole idea of group designs versus single subject designs. All right, so as an overview, what I wanted to go over initially is that in behavior analysis, we use what we call N of 1 or single subject designs. And essentially what that is the study of the continual behavior of one individual over the passage of time. Whereas most of psychology and most research that's out there today is based on what we call group designs, where you get two groups of people. And as you can see here, I've got those two groups of people, and since this is AI generated, sometimes they put the stick figures on top of each other, but these are two identical groups of 100 people, right? So you would go through and let's say you'd have to get 200 people and say, okay, one person's going to this group, the other person is going to this group, number two to this first group, number two to the second group. Now, in group designs, what happens is all these people are there and they have their scores and they're all averaged. And so you average the scores to get a result. Whereas in group designs, you can see the change of the behavior of the person over time. So I'm going to try to boil this down, give you a little bit of an idea between the huge difference between group designs and single subject designs, and why, frankly, single subject designs are better. Okay, a lot of researchers would say that's not the case, but I think this chapter by Baer really argues that it is the case. So let's go over to an idea here. So let's say that we have a new teaching method that we're going to use for high school students. And this new teaching method is designed to improve their reading skills, their problem solving, a lot of skills related to reading and being able to recall information. So let's say that we take 100 people and we put them in this one group called, they're in the new instruction method. They get that. They're the ones that get it. In the control group, they're going to be the ones that get whatever's in place in their high school now, right? Nothing new, all the same. So that's a group design. Now, Don Baer's analysis, the way he looks at it, I'm going to kind of explain. So imagine that, you know, we get, and he uses this book chapter to go over and kind of describe the differences between group designs, and he spends about 10 pages at the beginning of his chapter kind of going over and kind of describing how silly it is to use group designs, especially in our field. So you get a group of students, you compare them to another, first whole bunch to the second whole bunch, all right, like we had that we looked at previously, right? First whole bunch, new instruction method to the second, the control group. And you don't tell any of them what you're doing. Okay, so the students getting the new instruction method, they may not know it. Okay, they go in, here's the new method, here's how it's done. On the average, the bunch who got the intervention should, okay, this is theoretically, should behave differently from the bunch that did not, on average. Okay, we'll talk about that average thing here in a little bit because when you average things out, you miss a lot of behavior. You have a lot of individuals that could score high, a lot of them that score really low, but you don't know anything about each individual person. So he likens it to a game, that when you choose sides for a game, and typically in group designs, you have to do what they call random assignment. So you have to, you're going through and you're putting them in these groups. The new instruction method in the control group, let's say you have to be able to make sure that you don't have more of the students with higher IQs in the intervention group than you do in the control group. Okay, you want to make sure and evenly distribute that. So if you've got 10 high IQs, you put 5 in one group and 5 in the next. Okay, if that makes sense. So you choose sides for a game. The thing to do for a good game, let's say you're playing a game of baseball, a game of kickball, whatever it might be, you want to get some real talent on each team and some just average kids on each team and some kids that are just not good on each team, right? So that it would make no sense if you started out and you had in this intervention we're talking about with the high school students, if you had all the smart kids in the intervention group and all the kids that weren't so sharp in the control group, then you're different from the start. So if you're starting to think now, wow, this is a hassle, you're right. It's a hassle to do a group design. So if you want a fair game, you wouldn't put all the talent on one team, right? That's the goal. You would not. You try to evenly distribute it in order to make that work. So you need two groups that are all mixed up, no differences between them, and there are some really neat things that you can do with the averages, like cheat. Okay, you can actually make some data look a little bit different because you're using average. You're not using individual information. All right, so I'm going to try to clarify this. So I want you to go through and we're going to look at certain examples that I'm going to give you. Okay, so he goes on to state in the chapter. So first you look at how I behave, and then you give me the intervention, and then you look at it again to see how you behave. So essentially these kids in high school, what would happen is they would have an exam, and a lot of them, it's it could be a GRE, the graduate requisite exam, or in grade school, it's some type of reading proficiency exam. So you give the students the exam before they've had the intervention and after, and you see if there's a change. Now, he points out if there is a change, it might not be because of the intervention, but it could be because the person was going to behave differently anyway. Right? So that's what you have to kind of tease out. So what you need to do is watch the behavior a lot of times. Now he's talking about individual single subject designs, right? That we're going to be looking at in graphing today. So what you need to do is to watch a person engage in a behavior a lot of times before you give them the intervention, and then you watch them afterwards to see if they behave differently. And you do observations a lot of times. Again, that's a single subject design. Much simpler, much more elegant, a lot of things to look at. So here's the example. Let's say that in our example that we looked at before, where we looked at the individuals that were in the new instruction in the control group. All right, we're going to take two examples of an individual that might be in those groups, and he talks a little bit about how those differences might happen. So let's say that you got Mary in one group and Joe's in the control group. So Mary could be different from Joe in a lot of ways, and you may not even know how different she is. And even ourselves, we're different minute to minute. Okay, so that's how a lot of times, if we're looking at testing certain things that are reinforcing, you have to do preference assessments over and over again. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you look at this, there are a lot of things. Let's say that intervention that we talked about with the learning intervention involves being able to read something that teaches you a skill set. But let's say Mary, she learns better by listening, not by reading. And Joe, who's in the other group, or Susie, she may learn better by reading. Well, naturally, she's going to do better because she reads the information. That's the intervention. Whereas the other individual, they respond better to listening, and that's their learning style. They may not respond so well. Okay, so it's just individual differences that sometimes in a group design can make things look effective or not effective when they're actually not. Okay, so it misleads you. Okay, is essentially what he's trying to do. And averages can do that. Whenever you take the average number of anything, and I used to hate that whenever I would take our kids to the doctor when they were younger, and they would say, "Oh, you do all this when kids are young: head circumference, height, weight. You're in the 50th percentile. You're in the 90th percentile." We hear this all the time, and I think that a human being is not average. A human being is a human being, and they're themselves, and that's why you need to measure individual data instead of lump it together. Okay, so if you look at this, when they put the teams together, um, remember, Susie was the one that she responded only better to information from hearing it. But if you put a bunch of those people together in the intervention group that consisted of a reading intervention, she wouldn't do well. Okay. And she would then, therefore make it look like that intervention didn't work. But if you put a number of the other student that did well by reading, and it's a reading intervention, then they're all going to do well, and that's going to mislead you. Okay, so my point is, Bear's point is that when you get a lot, even if you try to randomly assign people, people are so different that there's no way you're going to be able to get an equal distribution to where you're comparing apples to apples. Okay, so you have to look at, that Susie, who loves only to hear, she loves the spoken word, and she doesn't do well with the reading. There aren't a lot of Susies in the world. There aren't a lot of Marys in the world. So you have to look at, if we're looking at the average, then you're actually squeezing out a lot of valuable information. Okay, so the book chapter presents that in a wonderful way. So I'm going to give you a practical example of how this works in single subject design. So we're going to talk a little bit about Todd. So Todd still tells his staff that he's ready for a new job. Okay, I hear that every day. But the core requirements of work, when we work in the community, is that you have to have good hygiene. So you are a new staff member. Let's say you're, a new technician in training, or a new staff member in a residential home. And you notice that Todd, he's got on a clean shirt and pants. He looks pretty good. You feel he's ready to start looking for work, and you take him to fill out applications. And I have staff that do this all the time. They take Joey out, and he goes to Amazon, or he goes to Burger King, and he brings back applications. Staff help them fill them out. They take them in. You find out later that Todd takes his dirty clothes and he hides them in a corner in his closet, and he only showers once a week. How could you have made a better decision about the job? Right, so I'll let you ponder that a little bit, and then I'm going to give you the answer. So you look at that, you think, okay, dude's got on a nice clean shirt. I've got a nice clean shirt on today, I think. I do shower more than once a week, though. But you can let sometimes appearances fool you. So here's how we could do this a little bit better. We're going to go through, well, these are Todd's hygiene data taken over time. So as you can see, these are hypothetical data taken from June of 2022 through, a year later. And we can see that, man, he's right in the middle, 50% on his hygiene scores. Now, with this is a hygiene score that we use at our organization. I'm sure others have different scoring methodologies. 100% means that your hair's clean, you brushed your teeth, you got on clean clothes, you put on deodorant, you cleaned up the bathroom, your clothes are in the proper place in your room. There's not a lot of trash or things all over your floor. So we look at hygiene, personal care as this big entity. Well, those are all things that are important on the job. But look at Todd here, the last 5 or 6 data points. That's pretty rough, man. That's 40 and 50% that he's getting on his hygiene. So if you had looked at the data, okay, and again, this is part of the intro to the graphing tutorial of why is it important to even graph data? Here's why. Because before, staff made the decision, oh yeah, man, he's ready. He can go to work. He's got a clean shirt on. But if he had looked at the data ahead of time, the staff person, he would have been able to determine, oh no, Todd's not ready. He's not ready for work based on the data. So this is the value in single subject data. Now, if you had taken, 100 folks like Todd and another 100 folks like Todd, and you would put them in different groups and all this, you're going to average together. But the person, the guy at Amazon, the guy at Burger King that's going to hire Todd, he could give a rip about the other 100 people if you're comparing things in a comparison group. This is why we do single subject research. This is why we do single subject data collection, so that we can look at behavior over time and look at changes before and after interventions. Okay, so let me give you another example. All right, home visits. And these are all cases that I've worked with. The names have been changed to protect the innocent, as they used to say on TV. But I've kind of described these because we have met these pitfalls. We've had staff that said Joey's ready to work, but he really wasn't when we look at the data. So here's another scenario. So Margie engages in serious pica behavior. Pica behavior is when someone swallows objects that are inedible. Okay, we have a lot of individuals that we serve that, for this marker here, they would take a marker cap and they would swallow that. We've had individuals that have had cell phones that they would take the SIM card out of their cell phone and swallow it. That they would swallow batteries from their remote control and the TV. So Margie did this a lot. Okay, serious pica behavior, swallowing batteries, SIM cards from her cell phone, and other non-edible objects. She wants to go home to visit her family, and she tells staff, okay, you as the behavior technician, she says, I promise I'll have a great weekend, and you don't have to worry about me. Everything's going to be fine. So as a behavioral technician, you recommend to the behavior analyst whether it's safe for her to go home, because the behavior analyst has asked you, what do you think? Okay, do you think it's a good idea? So as a behavior technician, you look at the facts and you say, well, she does so. The technician go and they end up in the hospital. The technician says, yeah, it's safe for her to be able to go home. So she goes home and she ends up in the hospital 2 days later as a result of swallowing a small battery that she found in one of the devices at her family's home, right? So how could you have made a better decision? So let me share with you how you can do that. So here's a scenario. Gal engages in swallowing pica behavior, unsafe objects. She's had to go to the hospital before to have objects removed that she swallowed, because obviously you swallow a battery, and there are a number of things that could happen if the battery acid starts to leak out, and what can happen. So you look at it, you talk with staff, and you know what? I think it's okay that she goes home. She's done well for a while here. She goes home and she has an issue where she swallows a battery. How could you have made a better decision? Well, think about that for a little bit. And let me tell you how. Now, we started to look at the data in this case, and here's what we found. These are instances of, we call this self-injurious behavior, but essentially it's pica. She's swallowing batteries or other sharp objects, sometimes, glass or other things, buttons off of her jacket, a lot of things that are very, very dangerous. And we started looking at the data, and we looked at, as you can see, starting at about data point 9 or 10 there, that every single time that we were observing an issue of self-injurious behavior or pica is when her family had visited her, or when she had gone home for a family visit. So what we started to do after about data point number 23 there is that we instituted a program where we stated that she has to have 7 days of safe behavior, of not swallowing items, for her family to come visit her, and it was her grandmother, to come visit her in our residence in St. Louis, and 14 days of safe behavior before she could go home to visit grandma. Okay, so that we knew, because we had a pretty tightly controlled environment, all dangerous objects were put away. And what we found is we got what we had never gotten before once we put that program in place. We got close to 2 months of no pica behavior when it was contingent on being able to go see grandma. And so if we had looked at the single subject data before making the decision, oh, she's good, she can go home, then we probably could have avoided some of that issue. And we probably, and for the longest time, others were not making this connection. And to this day, her family doesn't make the connection. Oh, she doesn't only do that with us. Well, yes, she does. That's the case. So data reviews, they're important. Okay, it could mean the difference between a job where a guy gets fired the first week for poor hygiene, which is pretty serious, or the difference between somebody potentially swallowing something very dangerous that could injure or kill them, that you could avoid by looking at single subject data over time. So this is very important. And as a behavioral technician, these are things that I wanted to point out just to kind of give you an idea of how important it is and why we're looking at doing this. So you have to weigh your options. You have to look at what was missed in each situation. Okay, in the hygiene situation, what was missed was repeated measures. We didn't look at behavior over time. Okay, for any of us that are working with individuals with serious problem behavior, or just individuals in general, behavior is different day to day. You cannot look one day and say that, okay, this person's got a nice clean shirt on, or so it appears, so they're ready for work. They're going to be engaging in clean hygiene every day, all right? So this shows you how important a pattern of behavior is. What happens over time? I've got a young man now that has had impeccable behavior for 2 weeks. He's ready to look for a job, but he's very volatile and he's over 300 pounds. So when he gets aggressive, even verbally, it's very scary. And so we've said, okay, if you go 3 weeks with no problem behavior, we'll get a job application. 3 more weeks, no problem behavior. Then we'll go and we'll fill the application out, turn it in. And then 3 more weeks, we'll set a start date, because I know he can go 2 weeks, 3 weeks with no problem behavior. But that week 4, we have a big explosion. So we're looking at a pattern of behavior over time. And if I've had this discussion with him once, I've had it 700 times, that it's great, but we want you not only to get a job, we want you to keep a job. It's a pattern of behavior. And for most people, with your coworkers, you only get to know a person after time and you see their pattern of behavior. Anybody can look good in an interview. How do you look over time? So how do you determine pattern of behavior? Repeated measures, okay? In group designs, you just take a pre and a post measure. Okay, we score Johnny before the reading intervention and then after, and then we make a decision. Here, we're looking at over and over and over again, we're looking at the pattern of the pica behavior or the pattern of the hygiene behavior to see what holds up over time, because that's what matters. Behavior over time is what matters. So you have to have close contact with the data. So if we look at continuing data and we look at continuing to measure hygiene scores week after week, like we do, day after day, shift after shift, then you get a graphic analysis that looks at more diversity. You can see over time where the person is doing well and where they're maybe struggling, and maybe what times of the day they're doing well and what times of the day they struggle. And in order to do that, you have to take more measures and look at just one person typically. So close, ongoing contact with data allows the events and the results that we're looking at, in the first case, hygiene, in the second case, pica and dangerous behavior, that allows those results that we're interested in to be noticed and to look at it systematically, over time. Everybody listening today, I'm sure you have a client that maybe once a year they engage in severe problem behavior. Or more of that behavior. And some folks, it's anniversaries of parents passing away. When I worked in brain injury for years, the anniversary of a person's brain injury or car accident was always very emotional and produced upticks in problem behavior. So you have to know about that and to look at that. So if you looking at somebody's data and doing research with this, okay, and replicating, which means doing things over and over again the same way, okay, and doing a research project on different things, maybe using a different population, that you have to use this graphic analysis of the data, because that's the best way to look at changes. Okay, I know over time from looking at Todd's hygiene data that over time that score of 50 was not just an outlier. He was scoring 50, 40, 55, 45, 56. He's kind of a middle of the road guy. And until he handles all the aspects of his hygiene and personal care, probably getting a job is going to be a struggle, right? And definitely keeping one is going to be a struggle. So that's why we do this. That's why we look at these things. So single organisms, single people, and that we're doing this because we work with people. So probably the most compelling reason for looking at just doing graphs on one person at a time is the fact that it's been successful when we do this. And when we look at the variables that control people and their behavior, the best way to do this is to look at that behavior over time. Now, that graph of Todd a little bit earlier, he's a real person. He's a guy I work with. Okay, his name's not Todd, obviously, but we have since started looking for a job, and his behavior analyst and his technician have put in a fantastic visual task analysis of what the aspects of his showering routine are. Okay, and we've put things in there that have helped him, like a shower chair, and getting a as opposed to having a shower head that's just fixed on the wall, we now have a movable shower head where he can actually go through, or staff can help him clean areas of his body maybe he couldn't get to. And now, as we're looking at that data, his hygiene scores are rising like crazy. So that is, in fancy terms, systematic investigation of variables controlling the behavior of single organisms, single subjects. We look at it over time. So you look at it as plotting this stuff over time so you can see how consistent a person is. So this is the best way that you as a technician, me as the behavior analyst, that I can show families, funders, day programs, grandmas, grandpas, that we can show that individuals, that we can control behavior and we can change it because we see exactly what the person is. And that's where the term comes from. You may hear a lot of hospitals say, you know, well, we don't know what's going on with Joey. We want to wait till he's back at baseline. Well, that means what they typically do. Okay, so baseline, before intervention, and then after. So the function of the graph has become very, very significant. It helps to make research decisions, judgments on how meaningful the data are, and conclusions about the client based on the graphic data. So we obviously saw the data from Todd shows us, nope, not ready for work. Fantastic, but it's just not ready for work yet, but we know what to work on. And same thing for the young lady wanting to go home. We're having all these problem behaviors, but yet, you know, when I had the conversation with the family and I showed them the graph, I said, look, when we're following the program, she goes 2 months with no swallowing of dangerous items because she loves going home and seeing you guys. But if she just goes home regardless of what happens, she's going to continue to do that because she wants to stay home and she's swallowing items so that the family can say, oh, honey, you need to stay with me. Or, you know, I would tell grandma several times, you know, she'd swallow an object, go to the hospital. Grandma would go, give her all the attention at the hospital. And then when she was discharged, she would pick her up, bring her out to a nice restaurant, and then bring her back to our residence. All of those things are reinforcing the problem behavior. We didn't see it until we looked at the graph. And so that's why we do this and we look at it this way.